the abbot looked at him for some moments and then replied, I'm not a bit surprised. All you've done since you arrived here is complain. Now, we're not the only people who love to complain. Our Israelite ancestors in faith perfected the art of complaining. From the moment Moses parted the sea for them, people began to complain. They didn't like wandering around in the desert, and they complained about not having food to eat. So God heard those complaints, and manna started falling from the sky. From that day on, they all had plenty to eat. But then people started complaining they didn't have any meat to eat. So God sent an unending supply of quail for the people, yet they still weren't satisfied. The Israelites even started complaining about their freedom. Slavery wasn't so bad, they thought. At least they knew what to expect. And at least there was some variety in their daily rations. It wasn't that nasty manna stuff. Somehow, even in slavery, they managed to enjoy cucumbers, melons, figs, and olives, among other things. So maybe it shouldn't surprise us that people complained that God should have left them alone in Egypt. As it was turning out, this freedom business was just too unpredictable. Things went from bad to worse. Now they were all dying of thirst. At least that's what it felt like. People hadn't seen an oasis for ages, and the water supply they carried with them was just about gone. In a few days, their livestock would suffer, not to mention themselves. Everybody started blaming Moses. After all, he was the one who made them leave Egypt in the first place. Then he insisted on wandering around the desert for years in search of that so-called promised land. People were getting so worked up. Some of the more radical folks were talking about killing Moses. Now, complaining is a funny thing. It's like a contagious disease, or these days, like COVID-19, that just keeps hanging around, passing from one person to another. Anyway, pretty soon everyone starts complaining, and eventually Moses complained to God. What's with these people, God? Why are you making life so difficult? Moses complained. Look at me, my life is in danger. Is that what you want, God? Dear God, you gotta do something. Give these people some water to drink. What's so hard about that? It can't be tough for you to do. Just give us some water. Moses offered a prayer of desperation. God, he prayed, these people are really thirsty. We need water, and we need it now. So God heard Moses, and God answered Moses' prayer. God provided water for everyone, but it didn't come from a stream or a river or even rain. And that shouldn't surprise us one bit, because if we've learned anything about God from the stories we've been hearing lately, we should know to expect the unexpected from God. God said, Moses, there's plenty of water. All you have to do is grab your staff and go hit that big rock sitting over there, and you'll have all the water you need. As silly as it might have sounded to Moses, he at least knew enough to trust God. So Moses did what God said, and water started gushing out of the rock and didn't stop until the Israelites filled their jugs and jars and their animals were watered. You know, sometimes I think we miss what's right in front of us. We just don't see it. Maybe that's how it was for the Israelites. God was right there with them. But they were so busy moaning and groaning and filled with anger, they missed the life-giving water that was springing up right in front of them. Friends, this story is a whole lot more than just talking about quenching dry mouths. This is also a story about being thirsty for God. They needed more than water to wet their whistles. These Israelites needed the assurance and promise from that they weren't left alone to wander around in the desert by themselves. They needed to know that God was with them and that the water gushed from the rock. The Israelites received the living water that is God's promise of generous and abundant love. Well, Jesus knew a whole lot about living water too. One day Jesus and his disciples were returning to Galilee from Judea, but rather than circling around Samaritan territory, they walked right through it. And that's not something Jewish people did in those days. Most people went out of their way to avoid Samaria. That's because Jews and Samaritans were not on friendly terms. Samaritans were a strange breed. They had unusual customs, and their worship practices weren't acceptable to good, upstanding Jewish folks. Well, that seemed to matter to Jesus. So he and his disciples found themselves in a Samaritan village one day at lunchtime. Jesus stopped to rest at the community well after he sent the disciples to the market for food. Jesus was thirsty, but he didn't have a cup or a bucket or a jar to scoop any water from the well. So he waited for someone to come along and give him a drink. Pretty soon a Samaritan woman arrived with an empty jar. Now, it was pretty unusual for a woman to go to the well at noontime. Usually women collected their water early in the day or late in the evening when the temperatures had cooled off a bit. Well, maybe this woman was a poor planner. Maybe she ran out of water just as she was about to wash the dishes, or maybe everyone at home was really thirsty and needed water to drink. Whatever the reason, as this woman approached the well, she noticed the man sitting there. But she wasn't worried because in those days, men didn't speak to women in public. Most of the time, men didn't even notice women. Women had their place. They were supposed to take care of the house, do the cooking, get the water, and all of that other stuff, while the men did the important work of discussing politics or the economy or religion. But Jesus wasn't concerned with what people might say when he talked to this woman. He didn't care about who she was or why she was there. He already knew all about her. It was just that Jesus was thirsty, and he needed someone to give him a drink. "Have you got any water?" Jesus asked. "I've been walking around these hot, dusty roads all morning, and I'm thirsty." And that's when things began to get interesting. Jesus and the woman began having a conversation about water, but they weren't talking about the same sort of water. The woman talked about the water in the well, but Jesus talked about a different kind of water. See, Jesus offered this woman the gift of living water, the same abundant love that the Israelites received that day in the desert. The living water Jesus was talking about is the water of God's overwhelming generosity that can gush out from some of the most amazing places. Finally, when the Samaritan woman realized that she was on the receiving end of one of the most wonderful gifts of grace and acceptance, she dropped everything and ran to the village square where all the men were discussing politics. She shouted out her good news. We can only imagine what the upstanding men must have thought about this woman who dared to intrude on their important business. But this gift from Jesus of living water had changed our friend forever. She was no longer a woman living on the fringes of society. She was now a woman who knew the joy and comfort of being loved by God, just as she was. Jesus, the Messiah, offered this woman the living water of hope and forgiveness without any strings attached. God's love poured out on this woman in spite of all of her faults and shortcomings. God's love is just like living water for us as well. It doesn't matter where we come from or whom we know. or how much we have, or what we have done in the past. None of those things counts as far as God is concerned. God's gift of living water splashes over everyone, and it pours out from some of the